welcome to This Month in Cyber, March 30th. I'm hoping we have time for Q&A at the end. We do have a fair amount of things to talk about. This month was a pretty busy month. I'm sure people kind of want an update on where we're at with the Exchange half-NIM, so we're going to certainly discuss that. We'll discuss SolarWinds. Microsoft didn't have a good month, I guess is really what it comes down to. And then there's a fair amount of storytelling. And in fact, when I looked at all these stories that I wanted to talk about, I kind of needed some kind of organization. So I'm referring back to a very common method, and hopefully you use this in your everyday language too, but literally this framework, the NIST cybersecurity framework, which I oversimplify with the graphics that are on your screen here, of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, that you're going to kind of see fill out. And there's a few examples that are kind of on the screen. That is a very helpful framework for conversations, right? And a lot of things that occurred can be really tied back to some of these 5 instances. So let's get started maybe by chatting about identity or identify, which really isn't talked about very much. A lot of people just kind of focus starting protect, detect, and respond, the middle 3, but let's start with identify. Identify, I'm not going to talk about the standards nearly as much as frame this story, right? Illinois, there was a research study done by Clario, and this was carried in the info security reference that you see down the bottom right as a February story. Illinois is one of the states in the world hit hardest by cybercrime. Now, how do they justify that nomenclature? Well, they kind of looked within, and this was actually Clario's out of the UK. They looked at not only all countries, but all states within our country. And Illinois had the most victims per 1,000, and they had the total amount of losses that was highest in terms of millions. So you look at us versus New York as an example. We're slightly higher on victims per 1,000, but way higher on revenue lost because of those identity losses. Just kind of an interesting story. This kind of helps frame risk, right? And risk is one of those things that ultimately is often done in those early stages. How much risk do I have? How much am I going to accept? And how much am I going to try and protect in later stages? Or how much can I not protect and I have to just respond to? I think we certainly saw some of that with the Exchange breaches and so forth that occurred this month. So let's keep going in this, still in this identify phase. We're talking about, this was sort of interesting. I think the other thing that happens in identify phases is you determine, are you going to do risk assessments? Are you going to do security assessments, vulnerability scans to test your controls that are in place in theory down the line? And, kind of ironic story here. There's an organization called We Leaked Info that actually aggregates all the data that has been breached. Obviously, some of it from Illinois breaches and Equifax and others, and they actually had 12 billion indexed records of things that had been exposed in prior leaks and so forth, and they had it all indexed. And because it was so nicely indexed, and you could go find identities, your identities potentially, or your employees' identities easily, they got to charge for that service. And by charging for that service for the last 5 years, the ironic part of it is they suddenly discovered their information, their payment information for people that had paid for their service out on the dark web. And what had happened is, as it kind of unfold the story a little bit, one of their domains that they use for email and payments had expired. And someone took over that domain and now had all the they were able to take the password reset information for the Stripe payments that had been made. Stripe is a service very similar to PayPal and Bitcoin. And anyone that had paid with Stripe, all of their information was gathered as part of this leak information. So the leakers leaked, all because of the fact that they let a domain expire. All because of the fact that they weren't paying attention, right? They maybe had not done assessments and so forth to determine when that stuff was going to expire. Similarly, when this happened at a much larger organization, if anyone is in the banking industry, you certainly have heard of Fiserv. And Fiserv, same story, really. They had a domain called defaultinstitution.com that they had used in some mailings And on some of that, they basically, it had expired. And if you did a quick Whois registration, you'll notice someone had snapped it up and began receiving information on defaultinformation.com or defaultinstitution.com. And so the gist of the story is track and manage your DNS records, right? Your websites, your MX records, all of those things are very important. And when do you do this? Well, I guess one of the ways that we do it, we do DNS assessments, ironically. They're part of our typical security assessment, looking at what DNS records you own, when they're going to expire, who owns them, are there any registration issues? You usually don't want it in your IT's name because IT sometimes changes hands and so forth. So you need to find some decent names to put those in. But we do assessments of all types, right? We'll do backup assessments, Azure cloud workshops, and so forth. So I guess the key of this is, evaluating some questions around your environment. We actually have a website that we put up just because we have so many assessments we do. We said, let's just put all the assessments on one page. And so, whether it be a one-day assessment and just kind of evaluating one service or one area, maybe like backup, or a 5-day assessment where we're looking at a number of things, we do a lot of these assessments, and that's often a handshake that we put together. So web page for kind of keeping stuff assessed and lowering your risk. As we kind of move down the chain, this is the one everyone likes to chat about: protect, 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 right? We put all of our eggs in the protect basket, and what do we get? Well, certainly one of the things and one of the areas we have to take a note is patching. And Microsoft, to no end, always has a monthly cycle of patches. This month they had some that were a little out of cycle also, but we'll chat about that momentarily. This month, to summarize the story there from Krebs, Internet Explorer IE11 has a number of patches that came out for it. DNS on Windows servers 2008 through 2019. That's pretty much all servers. The DNS has 4 or 5 bugs that were squashed, we'll call it. They're in the danger metric of 9.8 out of 10. So about as high as you have as a problem. You got to get this stuff patched, and you have to have it done near term. 30 days is probably an accurate benchmark, but if you can do it sooner, that would be better. Clock has been ticking for 2 weeks. And then just kind of a last hurrah, the Microsoft Edge Legacy, I'll call it, the browser, legacy browser, is actually being retired by Microsoft in April. So when you apply April patches, it's going to get rid of that Edge and give you the new Edge. Have you tested all your applications? Are they ready? And so on and so forth. There are some patches for the legacy Edge, ironically, this last month. So this is kind of the last hurrah. It's kind of a brief summary of the story. Certainly check it out for additional details. Here's another piece of irony. This Acceleron file transfer agent appliance. Okay, not a lot of organizations have this appliance. Some larger ones do. This thing has been around for 20 years. It's a hardened device for sharing files and large files between organizations. And a lot of organizations still use it today. They claim, 300 customers. You'll see some names here shortly. I don't assume that many of you use it, but the point is there are hardened appliance devices out there that can have specialty purposes that still need patches, right? And so this device in particular had a vulnerability that occurred in mid-December, and because of that vulnerability and lack of patching, I'll call it, on some of the 300 customers that had this device, some data was leaked. Specifically, Kroger had a breach of data on a whole bunch of customers with regards to that. They accessed the data, and then they published the stolen data up on a website. This should sound familiar to you from your ransomware days. And they were trying to elicit money from Kroger and other organizations to eradicate that data and get rid of the problem, if you will. So this stuff happens. Patching needs to occur not only on servers and workstations, also on even hardened appliances and devices. Similarly, there was a story about this you may have in your environment. Verkada is it's an upstart organization with cameras, security cameras and positional cameras around your organization. Tesla, obviously, when they're leveraging that product, that gets some notoriety. But long story short is they have 150,000 cameras. They had a breach where essentially they gained super admin access to all cameras in all locations, okay, across organizations. So, what did the bad guys, quote unquote, do with this? Well, they used it to access the internal networks of some of their customers, look around, grab whatever data they could. They also are claiming not only a full list of every customer that has Verkada, where they're located for those cameras, but also Verkada's private financial information. So they're still trying to look as to how to make money on it, but it's kind of interesting to note that security devices were hacked, needs patching, and provided security exposures too. So with regards to that, just to kind of summarize, patching, we've always kind of belabored this point, right? It's a very important process, but you really need to be at 30 days or less across your environment. How do you get there, right? When you have servers, workstations, you have infrastructure devices, look around, anything plugged into the internet is likely needed to be patched. So we kind of take an approach where we're patching, I think, 5,000 devices on a monthly basis, including servers, workstations, infrastructure devices, firewalls, ILO boards inside of your server that communicate separately, wireless access points, and so forth, storage devices. So it kind of depends, obviously, on number of devices you have, but we've got patching programs if you want to kind of offload that from your IT so that you can have some reporting. We also do pretty consistent vulnerability scans to validate that the patches indeed have been applied and mitigate the problems that they were designed to mitigate. All right, we'll move on within that space of protection onto ransomware. We spent an entire cycle last time chatting about ransomware. I thought there were a couple new strategies here we'd kind of talk through. One is, and here's another bit of irony, there's a ransomware gang named, CLOP or CIOP. They basically were displaying a name of alleged employees of a location. And this process of surfacing names and trying to identify information and employees within an organization is called doxing. And they essentially use this doxing technique in order to expose an organization's leadership, okay, out on the dark web. Hey, we have all of your information. Here's snippets of it. Please pay us and we'll make the problem go away. If not, we're going to unleash the ransomware, in other words. So doxing is just another strategy for them to elicit money out of an organization. Ironically, where they got this money from was Flagstar Bank, and Flagstar Bank happens to be one of the people that use the Acceleron appliance that we had talked about, the file transfer agent. So they came out with a statement saying, hey, this data is not a breach of our systems. It simply was this one device that we use for file transfer, and there was a leak in it, and some of the data from there went, but our systems are not at risk. Don't worry, customers, and so forth. So they had to implement their press and incident response policy, but really the exposure for them they felt was isolated to just that Acceleron device for file transfer agents. So just kind of a bit of irony on that. I guess the other thing that ransomware folks are doing this month that got added, and they're advertising this on the dark web, wanted to make sure you're aware, this is the REvil or Revil ransomware operator. They're really one of the largest operators. I think they're also known by the name of Sodino Kibi. They're nasty, right? They're like a top level operator, full chain, as we discussed, in terms of the affiliates that are implementing it, and they're the developers up at the top. They themselves as developers are making about 20%, 30% of the money. The operators are making the 70%, 80%, depending on implementation. It's those operators that now have a new tool at their disposal to elicit money. These developers have said, hey, you know what, we'll go out and get you some additional services. In fact, now they're adding DDoS attacks into the organization. So if you don't answer their request within 3 days, to get your attention, they may do a DDoS on some of your servers just to let you know that they're serious. They offer 2 levels, layer 3 attack, which is just to take down your internet connection. That's the simple, less priced one. And then there's the layer 7 attack, which takes down specifically specific applications. Maybe it's a web server or your exchange or certain services you offer to customers. So they offer these services to the evildoers, if you will, in order to elicit cash from you. So ransomware, bad, getting worse. Different topic. Switching over to other areas of protection though, multi-factor authentication. Again, another drum I probably beat with some regularity, but with the MFA world, what's interesting here is kind of looking back at seatbelts. And I don't know if anyone remembers the idea of seatbelts and not wearing them. As the article stated here, and this was an article actually from this month, in the history, or actually, I guess it was last year, but in the History Channel reference there. But the resistance was to the file saving devices was the norm, right? They were uncomfortable and restrictive. I don't want those seatbelt things. Laws came along, mandated that it had to be in place and so forth. And nowadays, I don't think people dream of going anywhere without seatbelts, but certainly maybe have some fond memories of playing board games or something in the back of a van with no seatbelts, like myself. In any case, how does that translate to technology? Well, along comes a vendor, SonicWall, that's now actually forcing you to have MFA on your admin accounts. Okay, well, that's how it begins, right? It kind of begins by having MFA available as a service. Then they'll make it the default for your admins, meaning it's turned on by default. And then later on, they're going to force you to do it. And this is what's happening in the industry. SonicWall, Microsoft, and others are going to force you to have MFA on your admins. You should have MFA on your admins, okay? At a minimum, if not all users. And so I think the point of the thing, and maybe if you use the quote liberally here, if MFA is available and you're not using it, very similar to seatbelts, how are you protecting yourself? The MFA in a day, by the way, that SonicWall announcement was this month, so that's kind of how the story got in there. But MFA in a day is a service that we have. What we're finding when we go out to customer accounts is they do not have, admin accounts are not separate, non-expiring passwords for the admin accounts or critical service accounts, because that's easy, right? We can't change our backup account. That account, which has a lot of privileges, we can't change it because then it's going to mess our backup and there's a lot of work to do. We understand. That said, there are logical ways to protect that, role-based access, least privilege, and so forth. So with all of that said, we have a service that we've been leveraging with our customers called MFA in a day, designed to essentially get you started on MFA, get your admins accounts up to 10 pilot users, outline your readiness, make sure you have a good experience on your PCs, browsers, Macs, and mobile devices for those 10 users. All right, lots in the protection space. This detection space can get pretty techy pretty quick, so I'm probably gonna make it a little faster today, just to, especially in lieu of the time we have, but still a very important area, right? Everyone thinks that they're finding out the issues that are going on within their environment, and then along comes something like SolarWinds, right? SolarWinds catches a lot of people by surprise because A, the methods of attack were so stealth that even people with really good detection systems weren't able to detect things. So detection, as deep as you can go, sometimes isn't good enough, especially when you're fighting against a nation state actor. That said, for the average consumer, detecting deeper means finding problems, and finding problems is ultimately what you want to root out. So this is kind of a whole lesson in detection. I think SolarWinds kind of goes that route. Obviously, we're learning more. Microsoft revealed there was some additional ransomware, kind of cool names, Goldmax, Cybot, and Goldfinger. They basically were custom written, scripts designed to maximize payments, decoy network traffic in terms of network traffic generation, HTTP tracer tool for detecting servers, finding out more about environments and so forth. So really deep level stuff. I'm not going to go too heavily into it, but what I am going to talk about is that they came out with an authoritative guide for SolarWinds, what happened. It's a 24-page document. If you have trouble sleeping at night, I recommend heavily reading. This is the one infographic I would love you to not memorize, but essentially know that this was what they call the kill chain. This is what they did at each stage to learn about your environment, to plant malware initially, do some more reconnaissance, detect some additional things, then infect and so forth and move on. I only highlight that chart not for you to read it necessarily, just to know that it exists, and then maybe to drive into a little bit of detail in two areas. One is this one that's highlighted right there called scheduled task. Okay. Quite simple to understand, really. Effectively, they wanted to make sure that their software called Sunspot continued to run if you rebooted a server. That's all it was. Easy from that perspective. Well, so if you manually looked in your scheduled tasks right now, you would notice the following lines. Actually, when I build that, you would notice the following lines. They're either there or they're not. If they're there, you have an indicator of compromise. Okay. All of these indicators of compromise that are relatively easy to look at were built into some scripts that Microsoft called what did they call it? Sparrow, their Sparrow tool. And their Sparrow tool, we built all their scripts into our detection tool called 365 Security Review for Office 365, so that because we're running scripts on folks anyway looking for other indicators of compromise, we added in these 12 indicators of compromise also. So whether you're doing it manually or doing it with a tool, either way, the goal is deeper detection than you likely have today. There's another area, I'll just kind of cover it quickly. It's domain trust modification. Effectively, through here and on this screen, and again, you can look at this in more detail later as you get the slide decks, but this is all about turning off defaults, closing loopholes in Office 365. It's also about detecting when someone's trying to enumerate something. I think it's on this screen. Yeah, as you can see there at second row down, they're doing the AD find. AD find is it's a tool to basically go find servers within Active Directory that do certain things. So whether you're closing down defaults, closing loopholes, or looking for people that are enumerating things, there is detection software to say, hey, there's probably something a little squirrely going on here. All of this deeper detection means you probably should have tools like either Umbrella, which is evaluating DNS and DNS calls. You should be looking at things like Security Review for Office 365, or look at 365 logs yourself, but you need to look at it each day, every day, and know what you're looking for. And if you don't have that process baked in, I suggest you get a process that does, or get a tool that does. And third is, if you want to look beyond Office 365 and look at infrastructure and Active Directory and backup and wireless access controllers in your firewall, you need a SIM. SIMs are complicated, expensive. We have a turnkey service called Alarm, which is a managed SIM offering. All three of the products there on screen can all be offered as a trial for any customer. So if you need to see it to believe it, talk about pricing, we certainly offer all of that. Okay, respond and recover. So respond is another kind of a deep section. Right, this is where we kind of talk about the Exchange thing from the month. I've got 5 minutes left, which should be fine. CNA had an issue, a sophisticated cybersecurity attack. You can read about it. Effectively, their website was down for about 4 days. They disconnected their systems. It wasn't a ransomware event. They just had an event. That said, they had to call up their incident response plan for that. Exchange. For those of you, and this I think part is probably fascinating. This is the current state today. We have, where's the number on the screen? 7,082 servers that are still unpatched, okay? Well, where did we begin? Well, let's step back in the time machine and see where we began. We began in the US with 125,000 servers that needed a patch on the earliest part of this month, the Tuesday, when Microsoft and other vendors said, hey, Exchange, you got a problem. There's several holes in there. So from that point of unpatched systems where we had 125,000, today we still have 7,000 unpatched. And you can kind of see the timeline as to what got patched when. We got 36% of our servers in the US patched in 3 days. Sounds good, but guess what? Hackers are moving along at the bottom row. They had 6,000 before you even started patching. because they knew about the event before you did. And then if you didn't patch in the first 3 days, you probably were part of the first 24,000 that got impacted. And at this point, I have a new number. They now know today, so my rightmost column, I just saw this article, there are 21,248 web shells on compromised Exchange servers as of March 25th. So servers might be patched, but still are exposed. Web shells are communicating out. They see those communications out, and it certainly allows for command and control in. We're waiting for a second wave of what's going to happen to those patched or unpatched servers that have compromises on them. What's going to happen? We could list off some things. How about some ransomware? REvil, people we chatted about earlier, they're known to be on about 1,500 servers. Acer was one of the organizations that had an issue. And specifically, they were asking for what I thought was $50 million. As it turns out, it's a $100 million ransom. It's the largest figure ever asked for as a ransomware request. 20% discount if they provided it by last Wednesday. So I don't exactly know what happened on the Acer story. I didn't follow up on it, but that's exactly what can happen. There's another group, other providers, not just REvil. They're now at 12 different ransom gangs that are taking advantage of these previous exposures and had unpatched servers. This gang has 1,500 servers. And long story short is, their goal is to exfiltrate data. So the web shells right now are just sending data up into websites so that they can find good stuff, look for good records, expose it, and try and extort some money. And then later on, potentially doing ransomware. What do you do about it? At this point, obviously patching, looking for indicators of compromise and verifying you're not exposed, but also having an incident response plan, a policy that outlines what to do in these situations, who you're going to call. Is insurance getting called now? Do you have an incident response forensics team that you're working with? And the incident response plan obviously can be tested and so forth. So whether you're doing incident response plans and testing, which might take a day, reviewing and testing, which might take a couple days, or building from scratch, which might take 3, 4, 5 days, depending on your incident response plan in detail, incident response plans are a good idea. I build out this last slide just to let you know that the top 15 providers for cybersecurity insurance account for 92% of the market. So a lot of the names you see there are going to be the quarterback oftentimes when you have a incident that requires forensic efforts. We ourselves, if you don't want to go through insurance, we have relationships with forensic providers that can help drill down in detail beyond what our capabilities are, and also preserve data in a forensically clean way, as well as go to court should there be lawsuits down the road. Last but not least is recovery. There's really not a lot to discuss on this part. I have one slide. I think when Microsoft had that Azure AD issue a few weeks, I think it was a week ago. It was on Monday the 15th. That's what it was. They noticed afterwards that some files were kind of getting deleted, or they didn't notice, some customers noticed. And obviously it just tells a story about, you certainly can read more details, but tells a story about things like ransomware or this Exchange outage that we had, or the need to rebuild Exchange servers. We've rebuilt, a dozen Exchange servers this past month because customers didn't trust that it was forensically clean. Hey, let's rebuild this thing. They had good backups. We were able to restore databases and so forth. Obviously, there's a shared responsibility model where Microsoft is not going to take on the onus of, backing up your data, right? So if your data is gone, that's on your responsibility, right? So the shared responsibility chart lays out on the left-hand side, even for a software as a service app like 365, that you have responsibilities at the data level, your devices, and accounts. So, to that end, what's your backup process? Have you looked at it? Are you in good shape, bad shape? Do you have air-gapped backups and so forth? We'll go take a look at things for a day's effort. We'll also completely take over management of it. This is probably the hottest growing aspect of our business in terms of managing backups for people. We're looking at 500 jobs plus a month for organizations, and we've got complete responsibility. Job didn't run, air-gapped, offsite, many of those things fall under our purview. We're doing a lot of that for customers, starting at about $500 a month, just to give you a perspective. Blogs, we had a number this month. Again, this is mostly for reference, but if there's things that you'd like to see, we certainly try to be thought leaders in this space and write about it, also do recaps. There'll be a recap for this blog up in the next 24 hours or so. We also are having events that we hope are meeting your needs in terms of trying to get you educated and interested in things that we're offering and seeing with our customers. In addition to this month in Teams and this month in Cyber, I'd call out at the bottom, we have Certs with Certainty, which is a CMMC standard, particularly important for manufacturing base, though you may find it some in the service sector or in higher ed that have CMMC requirements. Effectively, CMMC is going to let you continue to participate or to participate in Department of Defense contracts, which are going to increasingly, starting this year, require you to have CMMC certification and a risk score submitted to the Department of Defense to participate in those contracts at all. The entire thing will be blanketed with coverage in the next 3 years. So all of that hopefully is, and you can get a primer there from our registered practitioner, Joe Guarini, who's one of about 1,000 people in the country that's registered in this space. With that, I certainly will take any questions, though I know that we're running right at time as I had estimated. So.